Emily, who grew up in an orphanage, had always felt alone. She had accepted the idea that she had no one, until an unexpected encounter changed her life forever. Before starting, like and subscribe, it's very important to me. A cold morning spread its pale light over the old, faded walls of the orphanage, as if invisible hands of the past were gently touching every crack. Emily stood by the window, pressing her forehead against the chilly glass, her brown eyes thoughtfully watching the children playing in the yard. Their laughter carried something distant, something foreign, as if that world was unreachable for her. She had turned 20, but inside, she still felt like the same lost child who had once been left here. She knew nothing of her family or her history. The only thing she had been told was that she had been found at the orphanage doors when she was just 2 years old. In a small note tucked into an old faded blanket, there were only a few words. "Forgive me. I have no choice."
No signature.
That phrase had followed her throughout her life, tormenting her with questions. Who had left her here? Why? Maybe her mother had no other option? Or had she simply abandoned her? Emily had grown accustomed to loneliness. Of course, there were other children at the orphanage, there were caretakers, but no one could replace a real family. She often imagined what her mother looked like. Maybe she had the same dark hair and brown eyes? Maybe her voice was soft and gentle? Perhaps one day she would return, hold her close, and say that it had all been a mistake, that she had been forced to do it. But the years passed, and the waiting turned into emptiness. Hope had lived in her heart, but with each year it faded more and more, giving way to the realization no one was coming back for her. Now that she had turned 20, she had to leave the orphanage and start life on her own. But where would she go? What would she do? She felt as if she were standing at the edge of an abyss, and ahead lay only dark uncertainty. Her life had never been easy, but now it was truly frightening. "You've packed your things, haven't you?" The voice of Miss Harper, one of the caretakers, pulled her from her thoughts. Emily flinched, then slowly turned to the woman, trying to hide her anxiety behind a forced smile. "Yes, almost. Do you have a plan? Somewhere to stay?" Emily shook her head. A painful knot tightened in her chest.
No.
"But I'll figure it out. I'll get a job and find a place. The most important thing is to keep moving." Miss Harper looked at her closely, her gray eyes filled with concern. She knew the world outside wasn't kind, especially to those like Emily, who had no family or support. "If you ever need help, you can always come back here," she said gently, touching her shoulder lightly. Emily nodded, but she knew she wouldn't return. She didn't want to live in the past, didn't want to go back to these walls that had reminded her of her loneliness for years. "Thank you," she whispered. Her fingers tightened around the handles of a small bag. In her pocket lay a modest amount of money she had saved from working long weekends at a cafe. It was barely enough for a couple of weeks, but it was all she had. She took a deep breath, swallowing the fear rising in her throat. As she stepped out of the orphanage doors, the cold air bit at her skin, and her heart pounded faster. The world around her seemed vast and unwelcoming, but inside her, a small spark of hope flickered. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she believed it would mean something. Maybe, just maybe, it would bring her the answers she had been searching for her entire life. Emily wandered through the unfamiliar city streets, clutching her small worn bag in her cold fingers. The wind cut through her, slipping beneath the thin fabric of her jacket as if testing her resilience. In the distance, cars rushed along their routes. The hum of voices blended into a monotonous background, but it all felt distant, foreign, like it was happening in another world. She felt isolated from everything around her, an observer who wasn't meant to be part of this chaotic flow of life. She didn't know where she was going, but every fiber of her being told her she had to keep moving. Move forward, don't stop, or fear and doubt would crush her, making her give up before she even had a chance to find her footing. This city was completely foreign to her. Memories of the orphanage and its familiar walls hadn't yet settled in her heart, but they already weighed on her like a burden she had to leave behind. The people around her, hurrying about their business, seemed busy, engrossed in their concerns. They were wrapped in warm coats, many holding cups of coffee, their lives appearing perfectly structured, every minute filled with purpose. No one stopped, no one even glanced her way. She felt lost, like a ghost drifting between life and emptiness, invisible and unwanted. Her heart pounded in her chest, refusing to settle. Where should she go? What should she do? What if no one was willing to help her? Thoughts raced through her mind, overwhelming her with anxiety until she suddenly remembered the crumpled piece of paper Miss Harper had given her. With trembling fingers, she pulled it from her pocket. The paper was slightly creased, but the letters remained clear. The address of a hostel, her only hope. She took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts, and looked around. She needed to find her way. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly to an elderly man who had stopped by a newspaper stand. Her voice was too quiet, but to her surprise, the man heard her. He raised his graying brows and looked at her over his glasses. There was no irritation in his gaze, only mild curiosity. "Could you tell me how to get to Willow Street?" Emily asked, unconsciously gripping the strap of her bag as if it could give her confidence. The man nodded thoughtfully, his lips curling into a small smile. "Of course, young lady. Walk 3 blocks straight, then turn left. There's a bus stop there. You can catch a bus from there. They run frequently, so you won't have to wait long." "Thank you so much," Emily whispered, giving him a slight nod before stepping back. She hurried on, feeling tension spread through her body. Her legs were beginning to weaken from exhaustion, but she wouldn't allow herself to stop. A strange sensation tightened in her chest, fear mixed with hope. Everything was so uncertain, but at least now she had a direction. The bus arrived almost immediately as she reached the stop. The doors opened with a creak, and Emily stepped inside, feeling her frozen fingers tremble as they clutched her bag. She quickly scanned the passengers, hoping to remain unnoticed, and took a seat in the very back, pressing herself against the cold window. Her reflection stared back at her with tired, dimmed eyes, but somewhere deep inside them, a faint spark still burned. She was alone. No one was waiting for her in this city, no one would offer help. But something inside told her that this was only the beginning of her journey. And maybe, just maybe, something important lay ahead, something that would change everything. The bus trembled and swayed on the turns, its engine rumbling dully as if lulling the passengers to sleep. Emily sat, pressing her shoulder against the fogged-up window, watching as the streets passed by one after another, turning into blurred streaks of light. The glow of street lamps pierced through the glass, casting soft reflections on her pale face. She felt like a stranger in this city, as if she existed in a parallel reality. But deep inside there was a faint spark of hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The stop on Willow Street was unassuming. A peeling metal sign, a couple of passengers waiting in the shadows, and a gray building across the street with dimly lit windows. Emily took a deep breath, tightened her grip on her bag strap, and swallowing hard stepped off the bus. The cold air bit at her cheeks, seeping through the thin fabric of her jacket. She shivered but didn't slow her pace. Reaching the hostel was more important now. She double-checked the address, trembling in her fingers, and took a step forward. Her heart pounded rapidly, like a caged bird, and her palms were clammy with nervousness. For the first time in a long while, something awaited her. Something unknown, frightening, but hers. The hostel door creaked as she pushed it open, letting in a rush of night air. Inside, the place smelled of old wood, dust, and something spicy, perhaps dinner being prepared in the shared kitchen. A faint murmur of voices echoed from a distant hallway, creating a sense of warmth and liveliness. Behind the reception desk sat a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair, her glasses slipping down her nose as she flipped through a newspaper. "Good evening," Emily's voice wavered, but she straightened, forcing herself to sound more confident. The woman lifted her head, studying Emily's weary but determined face, then slowly set the newspaper aside. "Good evening. How can I help you?" Her voice was low, slightly husky, but not unfriendly. Emily swallowed, shifted her shoulders, and spoke quietly. "I was sent here. I need a room. Just for a while." The woman frowned slightly, her gaze drifting down to a thick ledger on the counter. After a moment she nodded. "We have a few vacancies. What's your name?" "Emily. Emily Clark," she replied, straightening her spine, though her voice faltered on the last words. The woman slowly wrote her name in the register, her handwriting neat and practiced, then pulled a key from a wooden drawer. "Room 12, second floor," she said, handing over a key with a worn number tag. "Rent is due weekly. Come by in the morning and we'll go over the details." Emily took the key gratefully, feeling the cool metal press into her palm. In that moment she realized she had truly taken the first step. This was the beginning. Unknown, terrifying, but her own beginning. Emily stood before the massive wooden door with peeling paint. Her fingers clutched the cold metal key to the room she had been given at the hostel. Her heart pounded in her chest as if warning her that beyond this door lay the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. This was her first real home outside the orphanage. Unfamiliar, unwelcoming, but still hers. She slowly turned the key in the lock, and the old door creaked open, letting her step inside. The first thing she noticed was the scent of dust and wood, mixed with a faint spicy aroma drifting from the corridor. The room was small but clean. A simple bed with a gray cover stood against the wall, next to a narrow wardrobe, and by the window with chipped frame sat a desk with a worn surface. Streetlights cast flickering reflections on the curtains, creating shifting shadows on the walls. There was no warmth or coziness here, yet despite this, Emily felt an odd sense of relief. This was her space, her new home. Dropping her bag from her shoulders, she slowly walked to the bed and sat down, allowing exhaustion to settle over her like a heavy blanket. Her legs ached from the long journey, and her thoughts tangled like a ball of thread she couldn't quite unravel. She closed her eyes, trying to escape reality, but unease wouldn't let her go. A dull knock at the door made her flinch. Her heart froze for a moment, then began racing faster. Who could be looking for her? She didn't know anyone here. "Hey, new girl, open up," a cheerful female voice called out, laced with curiosity. Emily hesitated, but eventually, she stood up and turned the doorknob slowly. Standing outside was a girl about her age, tall, with vibrant red curls cascading over her shoulders and green eyes as bright as spring grass. She smiled widely, as if they had known each other forever. "I'm Lena, I live next door. Thought I'd drop by to meet the new neighbor. Hope you don't mind." Her voice was casual and warm. Emily offered a shy smile, feeling some of the tension that had gripped her since her arrival begin to fade. "No, of course not. I'm Emily," she replied, slightly hesitant. Lena nodded, peeking curiously into the room. "Well, it's not exactly a five-star hotel, but you'll get used to it. Just don't be scared of the cockroaches," she joked with a playful wink. "Tomorrow morning, I'll show you where to get a decent meal. You haven't been to the cafeteria yet, have you?" Emily shook her head. There was something reassuring about Lena's energy, as if she had already accepted Emily into this strange, unfamiliar world. "Then it's settled," Lena concluded cheerfully. "Welcome to our humble little hostel, Emily. I hope you like it here." And with that she walked away, leaving Emily slightly bewildered but with a newfound warmth in her chest. Perhaps for the first time in years she wouldn't have to be alone. Maybe, just maybe, she had found the beginning of a true friendship. Waking up early in the morning, Emily felt an unfamiliar silence enveloping her room. Unlike the orphanage, where every day began with children's chatter, caregivers' voices, and creaking floorboards, here no one rushed her. No one knocked loudly on her door. No one shouted out the daily schedule. This silence was new, strange, frightening, yet at the same time it brought a sense of freedom. For the first time she realized she could get up whenever she wanted, do whatever she pleased, and no one would tell her what was right. She turned onto her side, staring at the gray ceiling, and took a deep breath. The air in the room was cool, filled with the scent of old wood and the faint aroma of someone's breakfast drifting from the kitchen. Her fingers clutched the edge of the blanket, and deep inside, a realization ignited. Her life now belonged to her alone. The thought, though terrifying, was something new, almost exhilarating. Faint morning light seeped through the curtains, casting soft golden patterns on the floor. Emily shivered, threw off the blanket, and slowly sat up on the bed. Her body felt tired from the previous day. The long journey, endless thoughts, anxious expectations, but despite that, today she had to take her first real step into the unknown. A sudden knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Light rhythmic taps, followed by a familiar cheerful voice. "Rise and shine, new girl. Breakfast won't wait." Emily flinched, then smirked, stretched, and quickly pulled on a warm sweater. She walked to the door and opened it. Standing in the doorway was Lena, beaming like a ray of sunlight despite her tousled red curls. "Ready for your first challenge?" she asked playfully, tilting her head to the side. Emily raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What challenge?" Lena theatrically rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, pretending disbelief at Emily's ignorance. "Our cafeteria. Only the bravest survive its food and live to tell the tale. You're not one to scare easily, right?" "Well..." Emily hesitated, eyeing Lena skeptically. "That depends on how bad it is. Are you trying to scare me?" Lena laughed, leaned against the doorframe and winked. "Let's just say I'm preparing you mentally. Once they serve sausages that could be used as building material. And don't even ask about the surprise in the porridge." Emily shook her head skeptically, but a small smile tugged at her lips. "You sure know how to inspire confidence." Lena let out a dramatic sigh and spread her arms wide. "I do what I can. Alright, jokes aside. Get ready, let's go. I won't let you starve, I promise." Emily chuckled and nodded. "Alright, you win. Lead me to this challenge." Lena clapped her hands in delight. "That's the spirit. Welcome to real life, new girl." Emily felt her tension gradually fading. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was part of something bigger than just her fears and memories. Maybe this was the beginning of something good. Descending the narrow, creaky stairs, Emily tried to keep up with Lena, who confidently strode ahead, effortlessly skipping 2 steps at a time. The entire dormitory hallway was already filled with noise, doors slamming, hurried conversations, bursts of laughter, and even the distant sound of music coming from one of the rooms. Unlike the sterile, almost lifeless atmosphere of the orphanage, everything here was alive, real, buzzing with movement and chaos. Emily felt like part of something new, unusual, but frighteningly real. "Welcome to our humble restaurant," Lena declared, theatrically swinging open the cafeteria door. "Here you have 2 options. Risk it and eat, or stay hungry but preserve your dignity. No one has found a third option yet." Emily glanced around with some apprehension. The space was small but cozy. Long wooden tables, covered in faded and slightly stained tablecloths, stood in neat rows. The air was thick with the sense of food, something fried, something sweet, but most prominently, a faint hint of burnt oil lingered. Voices filled the space, some arguing animatedly about a football match, others laughing loudly, while a young man in the corner sat completely absorbed in his book, oblivious to the chaos around him. Without hesitation, Lena grabbed a tray and made her way to the serving line, not waiting for Emily. Taking a deep breath, Emily followed, trying not to show her doubts. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman, stout with a stern expression. Her small eyes scanned the girls before swiftly scooping portions onto their plates. The menu listed oatmeal and toast, but the oatmeal looked suspiciously runny, and the toast seemed to have lived through better days, now resembling hardened bricks of bread. "Well, hello there, breakfast of dreams," Lena muttered, eyeing her plate skeptically. "Tell me, new girl, have you ever eaten anything this unique?" Emily glanced at the food and attempted a joking smile. "Depends. Do endless variations of pasta in the orphanage count as a culinary challenge? But I think this might be a whole new level." Lena snorted and picked up her fork. "Then congratulations. You're entering the major leagues of survival. Alright, moment of truth." She cautiously scooped up some oatmeal, brought it to her mouth, and made an exaggerated expression as if tasting something so exotic it could be a surprise for her taste buds. "And?" Emily asked with curiosity, watching her intently. Lena chewed, tilted her head thoughtfully, then let out a dramatic sigh of relief. "You know, I've had worse. Last year there was an oatmeal with some strange aftertaste. No one ever figured out what it was." Emily laughed and finally gathered the courage to try her portion. The taste was not as awful as she had feared, but certainly far from anything appetizing. However, the warmth of the atmosphere, the easy conversation, the light-hearted laughter, it all made the meal seem less of a trial. For For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could relax. "So, new girl," Lena grinned, resting her elbows on the table. "What do you think? Ready to admit defeat? Or will you manage?" Taking another cautious bite of oatmeal, Emily shrugged. "If I can survive this, I can handle anything." Lena burst into laughter and patted her shoulder. "That's the spirit. Welcome to our crazy but fun world. Trust me, it only gets more interesting from here." Emily smiled, realizing that, for the first time in ages, she felt like her new life might actually turn out to be a good one. After breakfast, Emily and Lena stepped out of the cafeteria, animatedly discussing the quality of the food and sharing funny dormitory stories. Lena enthusiastically recounted the time someone accidentally triggered the fire alarm while trying to heat soup in the microwave. "It was absolutely epic," she laughed, waving her hands. "Imagine 2 in the morning, everyone in pajamas half asleep, running into the hallway, and someone yells that the kitchen is on fire. Turns out it was just a burned noodle container. But the panic, oh, you'd think the entire building was ablaze." Emily smiled, her laughter light and genuine. This feeling of warmth and acceptance was new to her. She couldn't remember the last time she had simply strolled with someone, chatted about trivial things, and laughed for no reason. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged. But suddenly, her gaze locked onto a girl standing by the entrance to the dormitory. Her heart clenched for a moment. There was something eerily familiar about the stranger's features. The same brown eyes, slightly raised cheekbones, the recognizable curve of her lips. Even the way she tucked her hair behind her ear felt painfully familiar. "Lena!" Emily's voice wavered, her fingers unconsciously clenching into a fist. "Do you see that girl?" Noticing the change in her tone, Lena immediately grew serious. She followed Emily's gaze and frowned. "Yeah, I see her." "Why?" Emily swallowed hard, a chill running down her spine. "I think." She hesitated, barely believing the words she was about to say. "I think I know her." Lena's gaze flicked between the girl and Emily, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. "What do you mean, know her? Who is she?" Emily didn't respond. Her mind wavered between reality and hazy memories. Something deep within her whispered that this encounter was no coincidence. The girl at the entrance suddenly turned, as if sensing the intense stare. Their eyes met. In that instant, everything else seemed to fade away. The dormitory noise, the conversations, even Lena standing beside her, all disappeared. Only those brown eyes remained, filled with the same shock that surely reflected in her own. Emily felt something click inside her, like a long-lost gear finally falling into place, setting into motion memories buried deep within her mind. Her heart pounded wildly, as if playing the rhythm of a distant, almost forgotten melody from her past. A strange, almost painful sensation tightened her chest, like a wave of recognition crashing over her. It wasn't just déjà vu or mere coincidence. Something ancient, something that had always lived within her, had suddenly awakened. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible, dissolving into the air. Her lips trembled, and a flicker of something between fear and hope shone in her eyes. She couldn't look away from the girl, her palms grew sweaty, and her breath came in short, uneven gasps. A lump formed in her throat, making it difficult to speak, but her body already knew the truth, even if her mind still doubted. Yet her heart already knew the answer. It beat rapidly, as if trying to break free from her chest, accelerating with every second. And in that moment she realized, this was more than just a chance encounter. This was something meant to happen. Something that was predestined. Perhaps this was the missing piece of her life's puzzle. The one she had been searching for without even knowing it. Emily stood frozen, feeling a storm of emotions tearing through her from the inside. Everything around her, the noise, the conversations, even the gentle wind drifting through the dormitory courtyard, seemed to vanish, leaving her alone in the midst of this strange, terrifying encounter. The girl at the entrance stared back at her just as intently, her brown eyes wide, lips slightly parted in silent astonishment, as if she too couldn't believe what was happening. The air between them crackled with a charged tension. Emily couldn't move, as though her feet were rooted to the ground. Inside, fear and anticipation tangled into an unrelenting knot. "Emily?" The stranger spoke hesitantly, her voice quiet yet filled with a cautious fragility, as if she feared shattering this delicate moment. There was a note of hope in her tone, blended with disbelief, with years of waiting for an answer. And something about that voice struck a chord deep within Emily, igniting a painful wave of recognition. A shiver ran down Emily's spine. This was impossible, and yet it felt inexplicably right. She took an uncertain step forward, then another. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest, drowning out every other sound. Her head spun with the sheer force of emotions rushing through her, but she couldn't stop. Something inside pushed her forward, a primal instinct she couldn't ignore. "I." Her voice wavered, every syllable a struggle. She didn't know what to say, how to put into words the hurricane of feelings raging within her. "Do we know each other?" The girl nodded, her eyes suddenly brimming with unshed tears. She hesitated before taking a step closer, her movements tentative, as if afraid that approaching too quickly would make this moment shatter like a fragile dream. She faltered, took a deep breath, and then spoke with more resolve, though her voice still trembled. "My name is Sophie, and I know that we are sisters." Emily's knees nearly buckled. Her fingers clutched at the nearest column to steady herself. The world around her lost focus, melting into a blur of indistinct shapes. Her chest tightened, as if a hurricane had just crashed into her. Sisters? No, this couldn't be real. Could it? And yet, why did her heart race as if affirming every word? Why did a deep, unexplainable warmth ignite inside her? Like a memory she had never known yet somehow recognized. Fleeting images flashed through her mind, tiny hands, laughter, fragments of whispered words. She couldn't place them, couldn't recall their origins, yet they were part of her. This isn't possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her throat tightened, making it hard to breathe, while her thoughts scrambled for rational explanations. Her body trembled, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming truth unraveling before her. Sophie swallowed hard, her hands curling into fists, as if fighting back the tide of emotions threatening to overtake her. Then she gave a small, hesitant smile, one filled with years of loneliness, hope and fear. And in that smile, Emily felt something invisible, but undeniable weaving them together. "I've been looking for you, Emily. My whole life," Sophie whispered, taking another careful step forward, as if afraid her sister might disappear again. Her voice held such raw sincerity that Emily felt her legs weaken. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. Emily stood frozen, her breath unsteady, thoughts scattering like frightened birds crashing against the walls of her mind. Before her was a girl who had just called herself her sister. Sister. The word felt unreal, too sudden, as if pulled from someone else's life rather than her own. Waves of doubt and hope surged within her, clashing in a chaotic storm. You've been looking for me? Your whole life." Her voice was barely audible, rasping through her dry throat, trembling with a mixture of disbelief, fear, and that reckless hope that wouldn't let her run. Sophie nodded, her brown eyes glistening with tears she desperately tried to hold back. But one betrayed her, slipping down her cheek. "Yes, Emily," she said softly, her voice carrying both tenderness and strength. She took another cautious step forward, as if afraid any sudden movement would shatter the fragile moment. "I always knew I had a sister. I was adopted when I was very little, but I remember fragments of memories, voices, feelings. For a long time, I thought they were just fantasies, tricks of my imagination. But then I found documents. I found your name." Emily felt something tighten inside her, as if invisible hands had clenched around her chest. Documents. Her name. So it was true. She really had a sister. But if that was the case, why had no one told her? Why had she been left alone? "And you've been searching for me all this time?" Her voice trembled with the weight of her emotions. Fear, disbelief, and somewhere deep inside, a fragile glimmer of hope. She swallowed hard, trying to force down the lump in her throat. "Why? Why did you do it?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, laced with uncertainty and confusion. Sophie inhaled deeply, as if gathering her courage, biting her lip for a moment. Her gaze flickered across Emily's face, searching for any sign of acceptance or rejection. Then with quiet determination she spoke. "Because you're my family, Emily. The only real family I know." Her voice wavered slightly, but she held her ground, not breaking eye contact. "Because I couldn't leave it in the past. Couldn't just move on and pretend you were nothing more than a mirage, a childhood fantasy. I spent years searching for you, following every thread, every lead, hoping that one day they would bring me to you. I didn't know who you were, didn't know if you'd want to see me, but I believed that if I found you, I would finally understand who I am. I'd finally know why I've always felt like something was missing." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't leave you." Emily felt warm tears slipping down her own cheeks. They carried years of loneliness, lost hopes, but now something else. Something new. Something she couldn't name, but which filled her with warmth. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded so hard it felt as if it might burst from her chest. She wanted to say something, but the words were trapped in her throat. She could only stare at Sophie, this girl who was no longer just a chance encounter, but something far greater. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing she understood with striking clarity. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. Emily searched Sophie's face, desperate for any confirmation that this was real, that she wasn't dreaming, that this wasn't some trick of her imagination. Her heart pounded so loudly, it seemed to echo across the courtyard. A storm of emotions raged within her: fear, hope, pain, anticipation. The world around her blurred, dissolving until only the two of them remained in a moment so fragile it felt almost unreal. Sophie swallowed nervously, dropping her gaze for a moment as if searching for the right words to explain, to express everything she felt. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't back away, didn't take a step back, didn't try to disappear. "I know this is sudden for you. I know how impossible it sounds, how overwhelming it must feel," she said softly, yet with a quiet determination in her voice. "But Emily, I couldn't not find you. I couldn't leave things the way they were. All these years, something was missing. I felt it from childhood, even before I knew what I was looking for. And now I know it was you." Her voice broke, and she clenched her fists as if trying to hold back the tears. Her face carried the weight of exhaustion, not from travel, but from years of loneliness and the endless battle against the shadows of the past. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the storm of emotions surge through her. Everything in her wanted to reach out, but at the same time, something inside whispered that this was too sudden, too perfect, that life didn't hand out miracles without consequence. Warmth and pain blended in her chest, regret and longing intertwining, but most of all, a deep, undeniable familiarity, as if a missing part of herself had finally clicked into place. She stepped forward hesitantly but with purpose, and then, before she could second-guess herself, she embraced Sophie tightly. In that instant, something inside her shattered, not in a painful way, but like a heavy chain finally breaking free. Something she had carried her entire life without knowing how to let go. Sophie froze for a moment, then inhaled sharply, as if afraid that moving would make the moment vanish. "I don't know what happens next," Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion, struggling past the lump in her throat. "But if you're really my sister, if this is true, I don't want to lose you again." Sophie let out a sob, tears streaming down her face, but through them she smiled. "Me neither. I've been searching for you for so long, Emily. I imagined this moment 1,000 times, and I was so scared you wouldn't want to see me, that I'd be nobody to you." Her voice wavered, but the raw sincerity in it was undeniable. "I thought maybe it was too late, that you'd moved on, that you wouldn't want to know me. But I kept searching because I had to, because I always knew you were out there." Emily wiped away one of Sophie's tears, though more kept falling. "Silly," she breathed, a weak smile forming on her lips. "How could I not want to see you? How could I not want to know my own sister?" Sophie let out a choked laugh, then hugged her even tighter, as if afraid that if she let go, Emily would disappear again. Never again, she whispered fiercely, clutching her as if she was the most precious thing in the world. Never again will I lose you. And in that moment, Emily realized that for the first time in years, she was truly home. It didn't matter where they were, or what lay ahead. She wasn't alone anymore. Sometimes life separates us from the ones we love most. But true family isn't just blood. It's an unbreakable bond that no distance, no time can sever. Even when you feel alone, someone out there is searching for you, just as much as you are searching for your place. And even after years apart, there is always a chance to find your family. And more importantly, to never lose them again. Subscribe to the channel, and hit the like button, so you don't miss more heartwarming stories.